The morning my mother ran out of apologies for me, I was standing on the wrong side of the morning room door, listening. I had not meant to listen. I had come down for a book I'd left on the side table, and I'd heard Mr. Pembroke's voice, clipped, regretful, already halfway to the front hall. And I'd stopped where I stood, one hand flat against the wallpaper, and I had not been able to make myself move. My mother was the one speaking. She is, of course, very fond of reading, perhaps a little too fond. We have spoken to her about it. Mrs. Hartley. Mr. Pembroke's voice was kind, which was somehow worse. I do not think it is the reading. She has the sweetest disposition when she is calm. Mrs. Hartley. A pause. A long one. I could picture my mother's hands twisting in her lap. I had been watching her hands twist in her lap for 6 months now. It is not a question of disposition, Mr. Pembroke said gently. Miss Hartley is a remarkable young woman. She is also, and I say this with no unkindness, entirely unsuited to the role of any wife I could imagine offering her. She corrects me at dinner. She corrected my mother at dinner. She has opinions on the corn laws, Mrs. Hartley. She told my brother his sermon last Sunday was theologically confused. It was theologically confused, I whispered, to no one, against the wallpaper. I wish her every happiness, Mr. Pembroke said, and I heard the front door open. Truly, but not with me. The door closed. The clock in the morning room ticked through what felt like a full minute. Then I heard my mother, very softly, begin to cry. I did not go in. I went back upstairs and I sat on the window seat in my bedroom, and I looked out across the garden at the low grey November sky, and I made myself a list in my head of the men who had now declined to marry me. There were 11. I should explain, before I go any further, that I had not always been considered unmarriageable. When I came out 2 seasons before, my father had still been alive, and our circumstances had still been comfortable, and I had been called, by various polite people in various polite rooms, spirited and original, and quite a refreshing young person. My Aunt Levvenia had told me, before my first ball, that gentlemen liked a girl with a little fire in her, provided she knew when to bank it. I had not, as it turned out, known when to bank it. I had argued politics with Lord Brearley, who was 63 and sensitive about his views on the slave trade. I had laughed too loudly at a joke Mr. Holcombe had made about his own sister, then refused to apologize when he realized I'd understood the joke better than he had. I had told a visiting bishop that I did not think the parable of the talents was actually about money, and I had told him this in front of 7 other guests, and I had been, regrettably, correct. By the end of my 2nd season, I was 20 years old. My father was dead. Our income was a quarter of what it had been, and my reputation had calcified into something my mother could not soften, no matter how many apologies she made on my behalf. Wild, they called me. Sharp-tongued, headstrong, a handful. My Aunt Levvenia, who had once admired the fire, now told her friends in confidential tones that poor Beatrice had simply never learned to govern herself, and that my mother had been too lenient, and that it was a great pity really, because the girl had a pretty enough face if only she would close her mouth around it. The face, I will say, was the only thing about me anyone praised anymore. Dark hair, grey eyes, a mouth that my mother said would have been my fortune if I'd ever consented to keep it shut. I had been told I looked like my father. I had also been told this was not a compliment. After Mr. Pembroke left that morning, my mother came up to my room. She did not knock. She sat down on the edge of my bed, and she looked at me for a long time. And then she said, "Beatrice, my darling, I do not know what to do with you." I know, I said. Mr. Pembroke was the 11th. I know, Mama. There will not be a 12th. Not in this county. Not now. I looked at her. She was 46 years old, and she had been beautiful once, and she was still beautiful, but she was tired in a way I did not know how to fix. My father's death had taken something out of her that no one had been able to put back. I had not made it easier. I knew I had not made it easier. I'm sorry, Mama, I said. She reached out and put her hand against my cheek. I know you are, my love. That is the cruel part. You always are. She left. I sat at the window. The grey sky did not change. I did not know yet, you understand, that on a road 3 counties away, a black travelling carriage was already moving toward us. I did not know that the man inside it had received my name 11 days earlier, from a source I would not have believed if I had been told, and that he had spent those 11 days arranging his affairs so that he could come to Hertfordshire personally. I did not know that he had, in his coat pocket, a small, leather-bound book with my handwriting on the flyleaf, a book I had given away 6 months earlier and forgotten about entirely. I did not know that grey November morning that my 12th caller had already left London. But before I tell you about him, I have to tell you about the bookshop. It had been June the previous summer. I had gone into the village on an errand for my mother. Ribbon, I think, though I cannot now remember what colour. And I had stopped, as I always stopped, at Mr. Greaves's little bookshop on the High Street. Mr. Greaves was 80 years old and half deaf, and I was probably his most devoted customer. He kept the books I liked in a particular corner near the back window, and he never minded if I sat on the low stool there for an hour without buying anything. And he had once, when I was 17, lent me his own copy of Wollstonecraft, because he'd seen me looking at it and known I could not afford it. That June afternoon, the shop was empty except for one other customer. He was a tall man, dark-haired, perhaps 30, and he was standing in front of the poetry shelf with an expression of such concentrated displeasure that I noticed him before I noticed anything else. He was extremely well dressed. His boots were the kind of boots that did not get dressed by their owner. He had one finger pressed against the spine of a slim green volume, as if he were holding it in place against its will. I went to my corner. I picked up the book I had been working through, a translation of Greek epigrams that Mr. Greaves had been holding for me, and I sat down on the stool, and I tried not to look at the tall man, because my mother had told me, repeatedly, that I had a habit of looking too directly at people I did not know. He spoke without turning around. "Excuse me." His voice was low and unornamented. "Are you, by any chance, the young lady who marked up the Cowper?" I looked up. He was still facing the shelf. "I beg your pardon?" "The Cowper." He pulled the green volume off the shelf and turned, finally, to look at me. He had a long, severe face, not handsome in any conventional way, all bones and shadows, and a mouth that did not appear to know how to smile. His eyes were a dark, exact grey. Mr. Greaves told me he had a copy with annotations. He said the previous owner had given it back to him because she'd written in it and felt she ought to. "Oh," I said. "Yes, that was me." He came closer. He stopped at a respectful distance. I noticed that, even then. And he held the book out, open to a page I'd written on 3 years before. "You disagreed with him," the man said. "With Cowper?" "Yes." On that particular poem, yes. Why? I should have said, I cannot recall, and looked back at my Greek. I knew, even then, that this was what I should have said. A strange gentleman in a bookshop was not a person one entered into literary debate with. But he was holding the book out, and he was looking at me with an expression that was not flirtation, and not condescension, and not really anything I had a name for. It was, I think, the look of someone who genuinely wanted to know the answer. Because he wrote it as if grief were a kind of weather, I said. Something that arrives and passes. And it isn't. Grief is a room you live in. He knew that. He wrote about it elsewhere. But not in that poem. In that poem, he was lying to himself. And I didn't think he should be allowed to. The man was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Who have you lost?" I had not expected the question. I had not expected anything about him. "My father," I said. "Last spring." He nodded once. Then he closed the book, and he held it in both hands for a moment. And then he did something I did not understand at the time, and would not understand for almost a year. He looked at the flyleaf where I had written my name. "Miss Hartley," he said. "Yes." "May I buy this book?" "It's Mr. Greaves's." He said I might, if you didn't mind. I did not mind. I did not, in that moment, particularly mind anything. I told him so, and he nodded again, and he carried the book to the front counter, and I heard him pay Mr. Greaves what I am almost certain was 3 times what the book was worth. He left without looking back at me. I went home. I did not tell my mother. I did not tell anyone. By the time I reached our gate, I had half convinced myself that the entire conversation had been an oddity of the afternoon. A stranger passing through. A small, strange exchange. Nothing. I forgot about him, mostly. I forgot about the book. I should not have. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, 11 days after Mr. Pembroke had withdrawn his suit. It was on heavy cream paper, sealed with black wax, and the seal bore a crest I did not recognize. My mother turned it over in her hands twice before she opened it. She read it. She read it again. Her hand began very slightly to tremble. "Beatrice," she said, "come and sit down." I sat down. His Grace the Duke of Ashbourne has written to inform us that he intends to call upon us on Friday afternoon. I looked at her. Which Duke of Ashbourne? There is only one, Beatrice. I have never heard of him. Then you are the only young woman in England who has not. My mother's voice had taken on a quality I had not heard in months. A kind of stunned, brittle precision. He is 31 years old. He is unmarried. He is reportedly the wealthiest peer south of Yorkshire, and has refused to take part in any season for the last 4 years. He is described, by everyone I have ever heard speak of him, as a man who has never expressed an interest in any woman. Then why is he calling on us? I do not know, my mother said. The letter does not say. It says only that he is in the county, that he has a matter to discuss with our family, and that he asks our permission to call on Friday afternoon. Mama, what matter? Beatrice, I do not know. We sat there in the morning room for a long time, the letter between us on the small table. My mother's hand was still trembling, very slightly, against her knee. Outside, the November light was the same low grey it had been for weeks. It will be a mistake, I said finally. He has the wrong family. He will arrive, and he will realize he has the wrong family, and he will leave. Perhaps. There is no reason a Duke of Ashbourne would call on us. No, my mother agreed. There is not. We did not tell my Aunt Levvenia. This was, in retrospect, the only intelligent decision either of us made that week. Because if we had told my Aunt Levvenia, she would have descended on our house in a cloud of mauve crepe and managed the entire affair into ruin before the Duke's carriage had reached our gate. As it was, we had 3 days, and we used them as well as we knew how. My mother had the good carpet beaten. I helped Sarah polish the silver tea service that had been my grandmother's. I put on Friday morning, the only one of my dresses that was both presentable and not the colour of a funeral. A dove-grey muslin with a darker grey ribbon at the waist. And I sat in the morning room with my mother, and I waited. The carriage arrived at 2:30. It was very black and very polished, and it had the same crest on the door as the seal on the letter. A footman in dark green livery stepped down first, then the Duke. I saw him through the window before he reached the door, and I felt, I will be honest, a small, soft shock somewhere beneath my ribs. It was the man from the bookshop. He was announced. He came in. He bowed to my mother with a precision that suggested he had been bowing to people his entire life, and had long since stopped finding the gesture interesting. He bowed, more briefly, to me. Mrs. Hartley, Miss Hartley, thank you for receiving me. Your Grace. My mother's voice was admirably steady. Please, sit down. May I offer you tea? Thank you, yes. He sat. He arranged his coat. He did not look at me. For perhaps 3 minutes, the length of time it took my mother to ring for tea and for tea to be brought and poured, he made the kind of polite, perfectly correct conversation that wealthy men make in unfamiliar drawing rooms. The roads from London, the state of the harvest, the unusual mildness of the November. My mother answered each remark beautifully. I sat with my hands folded in my lap and did not speak, because I had been told very firmly by my mother that morning that I was not to speak unless I was directly addressed, and that if I was directly addressed, I was to answer in no more than 2 sentences. The Duke set down his teacup. He looked, for the first time, at me. Miss Hartley, I owe you an apology. I had not expected this. My mother had not expected this. I saw her hand tighten, very slightly, around the handle of the teapot. Your Grace? I said. In June of last year, I came into your village for a single afternoon, on a piece of business that does not concern this conversation. I went into Mr. Greaves's bookshop. I bought a book of Cowper's poems from him, with your annotations in it. I left without telling you who I was, and without thanking you properly for the conversation we had. I have wished, on a number of occasions since, that I had done both. The room was very quiet. You remember that? I said. Miss Hartley, the Duke said. I have read that book 6 times in the last 16 months. I remember every word of our conversation. My mother set the teapot down very carefully on the tray. Your Grace, she said, I must confess I am at a slight disadvantage. I was not aware that you and my daughter had previously met. We met once, for perhaps 4 minutes, in a bookshop. His grey eyes had not left mine. I am here, Mrs. Hartley, because I have come to ask your permission to court your daughter. I understand this will seem abrupt. I would like to explain myself, if I may. I cannot, even now, fully describe what my mother's face did. It went through perhaps 7 separate expressions in the space of a single breath. She settled, finally, on a kind of disbelieving courtesy. Please, she said, explain. 11 days ago, the Duke said, I was in London. I was at a dinner I did not particularly want to attend, hosted by a cousin of mine who is, regrettably, very well informed about the marriage market. He told me, in the course of the evening, about a young woman in Hertfordshire who had been turned down by every man in her county. He told me her name was Miss Beatrice Hartley. He told me she was, I quote him exactly, quite hopeless, sharp as a knife, reads too much, tells men they are wrong even when they are not. I could feel the colour rising in my face. My mother's mouth had opened slightly, then closed. I asked him, the Duke went on, what she looked like. He described her. I asked him whether her father had been a man named Henry Hartley, who had owned a small estate near a particular village. He said yes. I excused myself from the dinner. I went home. I sat up most of the night. He paused. He looked, briefly, at my mother, then back at me. Mrs. Hartley, I have been in possession for 16 months of a single conversation with your daughter that I have not been able to forget. I have looked, in 11 days of the most thorough inquiry I am capable of, into every report of her character that I could find. I have heard her described as wild and unmarriageable, and a great pity and too much for any decent man to manage. I came here today expecting to discover that the person these descriptions referred to was someone other than the young woman I met in a bookshop. He stopped. The room held its breath. I have not discovered that, he said. The descriptions are, I think, accurate. She is sharp. She does read too much. She does, by all accounts, tell men they are wrong even when they are not. Your daughter, Mrs. Hartley, has been described to me as everything I had hoped, against considerable evidence, that she might still be. My mother stared at him. I am sorry, she said faintly. Did you say hoped? I did. Your Grace, forgive me. My daughter has been refused by 11 gentlemen on the grounds of precisely the qualities you are now describing as desirable. I am aware. 11 gentlemen, Your Grace. Mrs. Hartley. The Duke's voice was very quiet. I have spent the last 4 years in the company of women who have been trained, since they were 9 years old, never to disagree with me about anything. I have listened to them praise sermons I have not yet given. I have watched them rearrange their opinions in the middle of a sentence to match mine. I have been told, by the most accomplished hostesses in London, that I am too cold and too severe and too difficult. And I have agreed with them, because I am, and I have never until this hour met a woman who simply argued with me, in a bookshop, about a poem, without first looking to see whether I would be displeased. He stopped. He drew a breath. I am here, he said, because your daughter is, by every account I have heard, exactly the woman I met that afternoon, and because the men of this county appear to consider this a deficiency, and because I do not. For a long moment no one moved. My mother's hands had come to rest on her lap. She was looking at the Duke, and then at me, and then at the Duke again, and her expression had become the particular expression of a woman who has spent 6 months apologizing for her daughter to other people's drawing rooms, and has just been informed by a Duke in her own drawing room that none of those apologies had been necessary. Your Grace, she said very carefully, I want to be quite certain I understand. You have come here, knowing what is said of her. Yes. You have come here because of what is said of her. The Duke considered this for a moment. Good, he said. That was the word. Just that. Quiet. Exact. Unadorned. A single syllable dropped into the air of our morning room like a stone into still water. and I watched the surface of my mother's composure break under it and reform. And I knew, in that instant, that whatever happened next, she would never again sit in a drawing room and apologize for me as long as she lived. He stayed for 40 minutes. He drank a second cup of tea. He answered my mother's questions. And she had questions, my mother, more than I had known she was capable of producing in such a short time. With the patient precision of a man who had expected them and considered them entirely reasonable. He explained that he had come down from London with no expectation of being received, that he was prepared to call again if today was inconvenient, that he had taken rooms at the inn at Hartwell for a fortnight, and was at our disposal during that time. He said twice that he understood this was unusual, and that he did not require an answer today. He said before he left that he would very much like, if Mrs. Hartley permitted, to call again on Monday and to walk in the garden with Miss Hartley, if the weather allowed. My mother permitted. He bowed. He left. The black carriage rolled out of our drive. My mother sat down on the sofa, as if her legs had stopped agreeing to support her. She looked at me. I looked at her. "Beatrice," she said. "Yes, Mamma." "On Monday, when he calls, you are to be exactly the person you were in that bookshop." "Yes, Mamma." "Do you understand me, Beatrice?" "Yes, Mamma. I understand you." She nodded. Then she put her face in her hands, and she laughed. Not a polite laugh, not a society laugh, but a real one. The kind I had not heard from her since my father had been alive. And she laughed until she cried, and then she laughed some more. I did not laugh. I sat at the window. I watched the place in the road where the Duke's carriage had disappeared, and I thought about a green book and a man's finger on a spine, and a question. "Who have you lost?" asked by a stranger in a bookshop on a June afternoon I had been certain meant nothing. I thought, he kept the book. I thought, he read it 6 times. I thought, very quietly, I'm in serious trouble. He came on Monday. We walked in the garden. The November light was still grey, but the rain had stopped, and the gravel paths were dry enough, and my mother sat in the morning room window with her embroidery and watched us through the glass with the diligent, blinkless attention of a sentry on a city wall. The Duke walked at exactly the right distance from me, close enough for conversation, not so close that anyone watching from any window in the county could have raised the question. He had clearly done this before. He had clearly, I thought, done a great many polite courting walks in a great many gardens, and had hated all of them. "Miss Hartley," he said, "I would like, if you do not object, to ask you several direct questions." "Please do, Your Grace." "Do you object to the manner in which I have arrived in your life?" I considered this. "I object," I said, "to the speed of it, not to the manner." "What about the speed troubles you?" 11 days ago you did not know I existed in the present tense. Today, you have taken rooms at an inn in my village for a fortnight. I am 20 years old, Your Grace, and I have been dismissed by enough men this year to know that I am not the kind of woman who inspires fortnights at inns. I would like to understand what is happening to me before I agree to keep happening through it. He stopped walking. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "That is a very fair answer. Thank you. What would help you understand what is happening to you? Tell me what you want. From you. From this." He thought about it. He did not, I noticed, rush. He was a man, I was beginning to understand, who did not say anything until he was certain he meant it. "I want to be married," he said finally. "I have wanted to be married for some time. I have known, for the last 2 years, that I would not find what I was looking for in any London ballroom, because the women I met in London ballrooms had been trained out of the qualities I needed in a wife before they were old enough to have opinions of their own. I had begun to suspect that the woman I was looking for did not exist. And now? Now I have evidence she does." I looked at the gravel. "Your Grace, I am not. I want to be very clear. I am not necessarily that woman. You have met me twice. The first time for 4 minutes. The second time for less than an hour. I have been told, quite often, that I become significantly worse on longer acquaintance. By whom? By 11 gentlemen and an aunt. I do not, as a rule," the Duke said, "take advice on the character of women from gentlemen who have failed to understand them, and aunts who have failed to like them." I did not know what to say. I think it was the first time in my life that I had not known what to say. We walked. The garden was small and badly kept, because we could not afford a gardener, and the roses had gone leggy, and the box hedges had not been cut since August. He looked at none of it. He looked mostly at the path, and occasionally at me. "Miss Hartley," he said after a while, "may I ask you a question that is not about us?" "Please." "Your father. You said, in the bookshop, that you had lost him. I have since then learned a little about him. He was, by reputation, a man who valued his daughter's mind." "He was." "Did he educate you himself?" "In part. He hired a tutor for the languages and the mathematics. He taught me the rest." "What did he teach you?" "How to read carefully. How to disagree without being unkind about it. How to recognize the difference between an opinion and a posture." I glanced at him. He was not very good at the second one. He taught me by negative example, mostly. The Duke smiled. It was a very small smile, barely a movement of the corners of his mouth. But it transformed his entire face for perhaps half a second, and I felt the soft shock under my ribs again. And I looked very firmly at the gravel. "Miss Hartley," he said, "I would like to keep walking with you, if I may, tomorrow and the day after, for the fortnight I have at the inn. After that, if you are willing, I would like to ask your mother for permission to formalize our acquaintance. I do not require an answer today on any of these things. I require only that you not refuse me before Monday." "I will not refuse you before Monday. Thank you." We walked back to the house. He bowed to my mother through the morning room window. He left. That night, I sat at my window again, and I watched the moon come up over the bare November trees, and I thought, something is happening to me that I do not know how to stop, and I am not sure I want to stop it, and I am terrified. I should have been more terrified than I was, because I did not yet know about my Aunt Levvenia. My Aunt Levvenia found out on the Wednesday. I do not know precisely how. My best guess, looking back, is that the Duke's servants had been seen at the inn at Hartwell, and the innkeeper had mentioned the crest on the carriage to someone, and someone had mentioned it to the vicar's wife, and the vicar's wife had mentioned it to my Aunt Levvenia at the lending library on Tuesday afternoon, and my Aunt Levvenia had spent Tuesday evening assembling the rest of the picture, and Wednesday morning preparing her assault. She arrived at our house at 11 o'clock on Wednesday in a hired chaise, which was an extravagance she did not normally permit herself, and she came through our front door without removing her bonnet, and she said, before she had even greeted my mother, "Margaret, Why did you not tell me?" My mother looked up from her writing desk with the resigned expression of a woman who had known this conversation was coming and had hoped, against considerable evidence, that it might not. "Levvenia, please sit down. The Duke of Ashbourne has been seen at the Hartwell Inn for 3 days. He has called twice at this house. Twice. He has walked in the garden with Beatrice. Margaret, why am I hearing this from the vicar's wife? Because, if I had told you, Levvenia, you would have come immediately, and you would have managed it, and it would have ended." My aunt sat down very abruptly. "Margaret, do you understand what is happening?" "I believe so, yes." "Beatrice cannot. Beatrice is not equipped. Margaret, the girl has been refused by Mr. Pembroke." "Yes, Levvenia, I am aware." "This is the Duke of Ashbourne. He has been pursued by every—" "I am aware of that as well." "Then you must, Margaret, you must let me speak to her. She must understand. She cannot behave as she normally behaves. She cannot— Margaret, she cannot correct him. She cannot disagree with him. She cannot tell him that his sermon is theologically confused. He does not give sermons, Levvenia. You know what I mean." "I do know what you mean. And no, Levvenia, you are not going to speak to her." My Aunt Levvenia went very still. I was, at this point, listening from the staircase, because I had heard my aunt's voice through the floor and had come down to investigate, and I had stopped halfway and had not been seen. "Margaret," my aunt said, in the dangerous tone she reserved for the most serious occasions, "I do not think you understand what is at stake. If Beatrice mishandles this, if she frightens him off with her ways, there will be no recovery. None. The story will be in every drawing room in the county within a week. The Duke of Ashbourne came to call on Beatrice Hartley, and even he could not manage her. She will not just be unmarriageable, Margaret. She will be a joke. And we will be the family of the joke. And my Caroline—" My aunt's voice caught, very slightly, on the name of my cousin. "My Caroline is to come out next spring, Margaret. And she does not need to come out under the shadow of—" "Levvenia, stop." "I will not stop. Levvenia. The Duke came here because of how Beatrice is. Not in spite of it, because of it. He told me so. In this room, on Friday." There was a long, perfect silence. "That is not possible," my aunt said. "It is, however, true. Margaret, men do not. This one does. Margaret. Levvenia." My mother's voice had taken on a quality I had heard perhaps 3 times in my life. "I have apologized for my daughter in every drawing room in this county for 6 months. I have agreed, with women who were not fit to brush her hair, that she was difficult, and that she was wild, and that she was a great pity, and I have done it because she is 20 years old, and has no father, and no fortune, and I did not see any other way to soften her landing in the world. I was wrong. I was wrong about her, and I was wrong about the world. And I have been wrong for 6 months, and I am not going to be wrong for 1 more day. The Duke came here because Beatrice is exactly the way she is. If she changes a single thing about herself to keep him, I will lock her in the attic until he leaves. Do you understand me, Levvenia?" My aunt stared at her. "Margaret," she said weakly, "do you understand me?" "I understand you." "Good." My mother stood. "Now, will you stay for tea, or will you go home?" My aunt went home. I went back upstairs before she could see me on the staircase, and I sat on my bed, And I did something I had not done since my father had died. I cried. Not the quiet, contained crying I had perfected over 6 months of polite refusals. The other kind. The kind that uses your whole body. I cried because my mother had defended me, in our drawing room, to my aunt, in a voice I had not known she possessed. I cried because for 6 months I had believed, in the quiet middle of the night, that the way I was had broken her, and I had been wrong. It would be 3 more days before I learned that my aunt had not, in fact, gone home. She had gone to the post office. I did not know, you see, about the letter. I had written it 8 months before, in the worst week of my life, the week after my 4th refusal, which had been from a young curate I had genuinely liked, and which had broken something in me for a few days that I had not known how to put back. I had written the letter on a wet evening, by a single candle, and I had written it to my dead father, because there had been no one else to write to, and I had said in it every furious, hopeless, self-pitying thing I had not been able to say out loud to anyone living. I had said, in that letter, that I was beginning to think I was not built correctly, that I suspected the ways my father had taught me to think had been the ways that made me unmarriageable, that I sometimes wondered whether, if he had not educated me, I might have been like the other girls, and my mother might have been spared the shame of me. I had said in the letter that I hated myself some days, and that on those days I hated him a little too for making me. And I had said it, and then I had wept over it, and then I had folded the letter and put it in my writing desk and forgotten about it. Or tried to. My Aunt Levvenia, on the Wednesday of the Duke's 3rd visit, after she did not go home, came back to our house under the pretext of having forgotten her gloves, and asked the maid for a moment to compose herself in the morning room, and used that moment to take 3 sheets of paper out of my writing desk in the corner. She did not, I will say, choose them at random. She knew where I kept things. She had been in our house 1,000 times over the course of my life. She knew, I think, which drawer to open, because she had once, when I was 16, complimented me on the lock and asked where I kept the key. She took the letter to my dead father. She took 2 other things, I will get to those, and she put them in her reticule, and she left. And on Thursday she paid a boy at the Hartwell Inn to deliver the packet to the Duke's rooms. She did not sign her name to it. She enclosed only a single line, in a hand she had clearly disguised. Your Grace. Before you commit yourself, perhaps you should know what kind of person Miss Hartley is when she does not believe she is being observed. The Duke received the packet on Thursday afternoon. He came to our house on Friday morning at 9 o'clock, which was 3 hours earlier than any gentleman should have called, and 4 days earlier than he had been expected. He was admitted. My mother received him in the morning room, alone, because I was not yet downstairs. I came down to find them both seated. The Duke's face was unreadable. My mother's was white. "Beatrice," she said, "sit down." I sat down. "His Grace has received some correspondence." I looked at the Duke. He was holding 3 folded sheets of paper in his lap. I recognized them before he turned the top one over. I felt my blood leave my face. "Where," I said, "where did you get those?" "They were sent to me anonymously," the Duke said. "Yesterday afternoon, by messenger. I have spent the last 16 hours considering what to do with them. I have decided that the only honest thing to do is to bring them to you, and to tell you, in front of your mother, what I have read, and to ask you what you would like me to do with them." I could not speak. My hands were shaking. My mother reached over and took one of them in hers. "There are 3 documents," the Duke said. His voice was level. The first is a letter you wrote to your father. The second is a list, in your hand, of every man who refused you, with notes beside each name about why. The third is a page torn from what I believe is a private journal, dated approximately a year ago, in which you describe, with considerable accuracy, the failings of several women of the local gentry, including, I believe, the writer's aunt. I made a small sound. I could not help it. Miss Hartley. The Duke's eyes were on me. I have read all three. I would like to tell you, before you say anything, what I understood from them. Your Grace, my mother began. Mrs. Hartley, please, let me finish. She stopped. From the letter to your father, the Duke said, I understood that you have, at moments in the last year, blamed yourself for the way you are, and blamed him for making you that way, and that you have been ashamed of both of those feelings, and that you wrote them down because you had no one to tell. From the list, I understood that you have been keeping count of your refusals, which any sensible person would do, and that you have been honest with yourself about why each man left, which most people are not. From the journal page, I understood that you have, in the privacy of your own writing, an extremely sharp eye for hypocrisy and self-deception in others, and that your aunt is, in fact, a hypocrite, and that you have correctly identified her as one. He paused. What I did not understand from any of these documents, he said, was anything that surprised me, or anything that altered, in the smallest degree, my opinion of you. Your Grace, my mother said again. Her voice cracked on it. Mrs. Hartley, there is one more thing. The Duke looked at her, and then at me. Whoever sent these documents to me had access to your daughter's writing desk. Whoever sent these documents to me knew what they were looking for. Whoever sent these documents to me did so with the explicit purpose of ending my interest in your daughter before it could become formal. I would like, very much, to know who that person is. My mother looked at me. I looked at her. We did not say it. We did not have to. Ah, the Duke said softly. I see. He stood. Mrs. Hartley, Miss Hartley, I would like, with your permission, to do two things. The first is to return these papers to you. They are yours. They were taken from you. I should not have read them, and I will not pretend I have not. But I will pretend, for the rest of my life, that they have no bearing on what I think of your daughter. Because they do not. He held the papers out. I took them. My hands were still shaking. The second thing, the Duke said, is to ask whether either of you would object if, on Saturday next, at the assembly at Hartwell, I were to make my intentions toward Miss Hartley unmistakably and publicly clear. My mother looked at me. Beatrice, she said, it is your decision. I looked at the Duke. I looked at my mother. I looked at the 3 sheets of paper in my lap. The worst, most private, most ashamed pieces of myself, returned to me by a man who had read them and decided they did not matter. I thought about my Aunt Levvenia in her hired chaise on her way back to the post office. Your Grace, I said, I would not object. He bowed. Saturday then, he said, and he left. The assembly at Hartwell was the social event of November. Every family of consequence within 20 miles attended. My Aunt Levvenia attended. My cousin Caroline attended. The vicar and his wife attended. Mr. Pembroke attended, with his mother, and so did 7 of the other 10 men who had refused me. Because the county was small, and there was nowhere else to go on a Saturday evening in November. I wore the dove-grey muslin again. My mother had wanted me in something brighter, But I had said no, and she had not pressed. I wore my grandmother's pearl eardrops, which I had not worn since my father's funeral. I went down the stairs of our house at 7 o'clock, and I stepped into the carriage we had hired for the evening, and I did not, on the drive into Hartwell, speak a single word. My mother held my hand. When we entered the assembly room, the conversation did not stop the way it does in novels. It only paused, very slightly, like a breath taken between sentences. Then it resumed, more quietly than before, and I felt every eye in the room move toward me and away again, in the rapid, glancing way that means a conversation is being conducted entirely about you and not at all to your face. The Duke was already there. He was standing near the windows on the far side of the room, talking to a man I did not know, and he was not looking at the door. I had time, before he saw us, to register that he was the tallest man in the room and the most severely dressed, and that he was the only person in the assembly who appeared to be entirely indifferent to whether or not anyone else in the assembly noticed him. He turned. He saw us. He excused himself from his conversation. He crossed the room. He did not, I want to be clear, cross the room quickly. He crossed it at exactly the pace a man crosses a room he has decided to cross, which was, in that assembly, on that evening, the most public possible thing he could have done. Every woman in the room watched him. Every man in the room watched him. By the time he reached us, the conversation in the assembly had quieted to the kind of silence that is not quite silence. The rustle of fans, the small adjustments of skirts, the held breaths of women who had been sure, the moment they entered the room and saw him, that he had come tonight to choose someone, and were now realizing, with varying degrees of horror, who. He stopped in front of us. He bowed to my mother. "Mrs. Hartley, good evening." "Your Grace." He turned to me. He bowed. "Miss Hartley, may I have the honor of the first 2 dances?" I knew, even as I heard myself say it, that this was the moment. The first 2 dances at the assembly. The dances reserved, by every iron rule of the county, for the partner a gentleman intended seriously. He was not asking for 1 dance. He was not asking for a dance after supper. He was asking for the 2 dances that in our county, in our world, in November of that year, meant a man had chosen a woman in front of every person who mattered. "Your Grace," I said, "you may." He offered his arm. I took it. He walked me to the floor. We did not, on the way, look at my Aunt Levvenia. I felt her eyes on the back of my neck like a hot coal. I did not turn. The Duke did not turn. We stopped at our place in the set, and the music began, and we danced. He was a good dancer. Of course he was. He had probably been dancing properly since he was 11. What I had not expected, what I had not prepared myself for, was that he would, in the middle of the first dance, when the figures of the set brought us close enough for him to speak under the music, lean down very slightly and say, "Miss Hartley, are you all right?" "Yes, Your Grace." "You are very pale." "I am extremely angry with my aunt." "Ah." The figure of the dance separated us. When it brought us back, he said, "I should mention, I have already spoken to your aunt this evening." "Your Grace." Briefly, before you arrived. I introduced myself. I told her that I had recently received some correspondence about your character that I had found extremely useful, and that I hoped to have the opportunity, before the evening was out, to thank the sender personally. "You did not." I did. She was, I think, surprised. "Your Grace, you are dangerous." He almost smiled. "I have been called worse." We danced. We danced the second dance. He led me back to my mother. He did not leave my side for the rest of the evening, and at supper he sat with us. And when the assembly began to thin, after midnight, he asked my mother, in a voice that carried just far enough for the women at the next table to hear, whether he might call on her on Monday morning to discuss a matter of considerable importance to him. My mother said, yes. We went home in the carriage. My mother held my hand the entire way. Halfway home, she began very softly to laugh. "What?" I said. 11 men, she said. "Mama, 11 men, Beatrice." "I know. And not one of them," she said, "had any idea." He came on Monday. He asked. I said yes. I will not tell you about the proposal in detail, because some things, even at the end of a long story, are allowed to remain a person's own. I will tell you only that it took place in the same morning room where, 3 weeks before, Mr. Pembroke had told my mother that I was theologically disagreeable, and that the Duke asked me in approximately 17 words, none of them ornamental, and that I answered him in 3. I will tell you that after I said yes, he took a small leather-bound book out of his coat pocket, and he set it on the small table between us, and he said, "I have been carrying this around for 16 months. I think I would like, if you do not mind, to give it back to you now." It was the green Cooper, my handwriting on the flyleaf. I picked it up. I held it for a long time. "Your Grace," I said. "Yes." "You said, in the bookshop, that you wanted to know who I had lost. Why did you ask?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because," he said, "I had also lost someone, and you had written about grief in a way I had not been able to write about it. And I thought, if there was a young woman somewhere in England who understood that grief was a room you lived in, then perhaps there was, somewhere in England, a future I had not yet given up on." I looked at the book in my hands. "Who did you lose?" "My older brother, 4 years ago. He was the Duke before me. I did not, until he died, expect to be." "I am sorry." "I know you are." He looked at me. The grey eyes were not cold at all, I realized. Had never been cold, really. They had only been waiting. That was the other thing I understood, in the bookshop. You meant it. We were married 6 weeks later, at the small church in our village, on a clear, bright December morning that smelled of cold earth and frost. My mother cried. My Aunt Levvenia did not attend, which surprised no one. My cousin Caroline did, and danced at the breakfast, and I forgave her for everything she had not done and several things she had, because she was 16 and hopeful, and did not yet know what the world would try to do to her. The Duke and I went home, after the breakfast, to the house he had taken for us in the next county. It was not Ashbourne. Ashbourne would come later, in the spring. But it was ours, and it was warm, and there was a fire in the library, and on the table by the fire, on the evening of our wedding day, there was a green, leather-bound copy of Cooper's poems, with my handwriting on the flyleaf, and beside it, in a hand I was beginning to know very well, a single new annotation on the page I had once disagreed with. It said, in the margin, in the Duke's careful pen, "She is right." I closed the book. I sat down by the fire. My husband came in from the hall, and he sat down across from me, and he looked at me for a long moment, and then he said, very quietly, "Good evening, Miss Hartley. Your Grace?" "Beatrice." "Yes. I would like, if you do not object, to read with you for an hour before supper." "I do not object," I said. We did. We read for an hour. The fire moved. The November had become December, and the December would, in time, become spring. And the spring would carry us north to Ashbourne, and the Ashbourne would carry us into a life I had not, in the worst week of the previous year, believed I would ever be permitted to have. But that evening, by the fire in our small borrowed library, with a green book on the table between us and the cold pressing softly at the windows, I understood, for the first time in my life, what my father had been trying to teach me. He had not been teaching me to be unmarriageable. He had been teaching me to be findable. And someone, finally at last, against all the patient evidence of 11 gentlemen and an aunt, had found